can.
All right, if you could just take one of those and pass that down, I'm gonna just briefly go over this. I did bring you a written document, and so first, I just wanna give you some rundown on it. As you know, the trustees appointed a committee on the Village Sewage Treatment Plant Advisory Committee, and I was asked if I would facilitate, and then ended up being chair as well on this committee. So I prepared this report. This report was sent out to all of the committee members, and each of the committee members had an opportunity to comment on it, and they each have. And so I just want to give you the rundown. Charlie Conrose, Bill Stata, Paul Scheibel, Greg Chambry, Marcus Lathrop from Xerox, Jimmy Guck, and Bill Horath were all members of this committee. The committee did meet on 3 occasions, and the majority of the committee members were present at each meeting. The engineering studies performed by both the engineering firms were distributed to all the committee members in their entirety. The village study engineering firm was represented at all 3 members. The joint study engineering firm was not represented. Jake Swingley, John Carnavelli, and Marcia Adams were present at all 3 meetings, and trustee Jude Lancy was present at 2 of the 3 meetings. Minutes for each meeting were prepared, and I believe that you have been sent all of those. So the committee did receive extensive input from Jake in PowerPoint presentations and verbally in all 3 meetings. That input focused on areas identified by Jake as areas of concern and unanswered questions. He also discussed his objectives to the fundamentals of combining the engineering data from the 2 studies into one apples-to-apples comparison. There was a significant focus on the user cost estimates page of the Barton and LaDouche presentation that was made to the trustees on August 22nd. Clem Chung from Labella was told the committee that he was in agreement with those numbers in the apples-to-apples comparison as prepared, but noted that there is a difference in the 2 methodologies used by the 2 firms, and that neither approach is either inherently wrong or inaccurate. Committee members were polled and asked to share their perspective, concerns, and priorities. Each member expressed concerns about current costs and future costs. Xerox did express concerns regarding current permitting and materials handling in place with the village now that would need to be addressed if a change in plants, if the town is able to or will be able to handle those capabilities. There was a brief discussion about an underlying feeling that a merger of the plants would be one more step in the direction of dissolving the village. This was addressed by me, that if the committee members were in opposition solely on that belief, then the committee was wasting everybody's time, and I think that that kind of got quietly put away pretty quickly. Committee topics also included energy efficiencies and the differences between the plant's operations that create differences in energy use. The lack of redundancy at the village plant was discussed, as was the potential of it becoming a requirement in the future, as the village's current redundant facility located at Phillips Road is not operational. Village debt levels were also discussed, as was the $500,000 transfer or loan between the village funds for the previous emergency plant repair. The topic of the collection system and the village current debt in the context of transferring either or both to the town was discussed. It's not known to the committee if that could or would be able to happen, and what, if any, legal restrictions may come into play. How existing debt and collection system expenses would impact the overall cost to the village users was also an unknown. The unpredictability of the projected future upgrade and repair costs and the availability of future low or no cost borrowing and the future availability of grants was discussed. Because currently available grants are not included in the user cost estimates, it's difficult to estimate their current year and future year impact on rates. Xerox flow volume was a topic, and the Xerox representative present indicated that they had not been informed of any current or future plans that would reduce flow to the village plant. But that representative also indicated that consolidation within the campus is taking place to make more efficient use of space costs, which is resulting in buildings becoming unused as operations are moved to other buildings. That consolidation presents an opportunity for business growth outside of strictly Xerox operations, potentially increasing volume at the Village of Webster treatment facility. Xerox volume makes up about half of the volume to the village plant. Based on Xerox representatives' input at the time of the Barton evaluations, Xerox indicated that it did not foresee any increase in flows from their facility. And in developing that regional alternative, the 20-year planning period was included in the design basis. Flows and load contribution from the village, including the current Xerox flows, were based on the village PER and assumed a 4% growth, including Xerox. Future growth in the village is largely limited by additional development footprint, and the flow and loads from the town portion was assumed to increase by an average of 0.75 per year over 20 years, equivalent to a long-term increase in town contribution of 16%. Given the future growth assumptions, the regional alternative would then have a monthly average capacity of around 9.7 million gallons per day. That's just flow, it doesn't talk about load. Town is currently processing around 3.98 million gallons a day, and the village is approximately 1.39. Combined, they would be about 5.39. So the purpose of that discussion was basically to allay some of the question about whether or not a regional plant would be able to handle any increased flow from Xerox. And it would be able to, given the fact that that regional plant would be designed in such a way that it could take increased flow. To current flow, it would be roughly at about 55% of what its capacity would be if the regional approach were taken. So the current village EDU rates were discussed, as was the rate change from 120 to 150 made by the village for 2019. How village rates would be calculated into the future was discussed if the village maintained the collection system and had to service the existing debt. The likely understanding would be that there would be a rate for the treatment at the town plant and a second rate to cover debt and collection costs. It was noted that rates are established by the trustees and the town board and are not established by any set required formula. Philosophical differences between the boards could result in differences in setting rates. One board may wish to calculate an amount based on future needs into the current rate, setting aside money into the future, and another board may say, we're gonna wait and spend that money into the future, we'll bond it into the future, the entire amounts. So the summary and the conclusion first is that the committee would like to thank the village trustees for the opportunity to look at the village sewage treatment plant situation and suggest a path forward. The diversity in the group led to healthy discussions and good observations about the current situation. The advisory committee was assisted with the presence of a lot of engineering expertise and was able to gain a decent understanding at a high level of the engineering aspects of keeping the village plant versus moving to a regional model. Through this exercise, there was a general recognition that there are quite a few unknowns that go along with flow volume and plant requirements. The committee recognized that no amount of research would be able to accurately predict things like the future of the Xerox campus, new environmental regulations for municipal treatment plants, potential state grants, these types of projects. These are just a couple of the examples of the unknown, and there are plenty of others that were discussed. Once this part of the exercise was completed, it became very apparent to the group that there was insufficient information to be able to assess the tactical and financial implications to the village moving forward with a regional approach. A lot of data and numbers were available about the village scenario, but there was no regional deal to be able to evaluate against staying with a village approach. There are many transitional factors and activities in a regional approach. Large components of making a regional deal with the town have not been negotiated, and if they have been, they were not made aware to the committee. There was some talk in the group and speculation on what would happen if nothing concrete with regard to assumption of debt, collection of fees, payment for infrastructure, care and maintenance of the village collection system, closing the village plant, disposition of village employees working in the plant, etc. In essence, there is nothing at this point that describes the roles and responsibilities of a regional treatment compared to the existing village treatment. Without the specifics of what the regional treatment approach would look like, the consensus of the committee was that it is not able to make a recommendation to the trustees about moving forward or not moving forward with a combined sewage treatment approach. The committee does, however, recommend that the village trustees reach out to the town board and ask for a joint committee of trustees and town board members to meet and develop a proposal or model of how a merged treatment system would look for the town and the village. This model would need to be developed and agreed upon by both municipalities. That committee would need to address the several items in the discussion above, such as the debt, the collection system, the rate calculation methodology, etc. Once that proposal or model was established and evaluated, the impact on the current and future village users might be more easily determined. It's also recognized that no amount of study will be able to accurately predict the future and its moving variables. So we would be happy to elaborate on any of those points in this report and look forward to an eventual decision in this matter. So I'll answer any questions about the committee's work, and then I do have one topic that I want to bring up that came to light after the report was put together that I just want to bring to your attention. So are there any questions?
I don't have any particular questions. I just want to say thank you to you for presenting this, putting it together, and Jake and Jude and others that were on that team, Marcia. So I appreciate the work that you guys did.
It was, we crammed a lot into 3 meetings. We got a lot of information. We were assisted by Clem, or his people were there at every meeting, so we had that ability. It was very difficult to look at this versus this when we didn't know what this looked like. And so that's why the committee's recommendation would be that it really, I think that we gotta kind of maybe develop a model with the town and say, what would it look like? And so that'll bring me, if there's no other questions, Carl, did you have a question?
Yeah, we've already had, our engineering study by, Clem and Lobella and Barton, and what you're suggesting appears to me that we wanna start that process all over again and see what it looks like. We've
No, I
already
wouldn't-
been told what it looks like.
I wouldn't say that that was what I wouldn't say that that's what the recommendation of the committee is. I think the committee has said you have an engineering study, you have multiple engineering evaluations as to what has to happen at the plant in the village. The town's regional approach has been developed by the engineers, they've done some preliminary work as to what the cost estimates would be, the user estimates would be. I don't think that it's their intent to say you need to go back to an engineering groundwork. I think what it is, their intent is that the trustees need to meet with the board, at the town board, and you need to decide on certain things, like where are we gonna go with the collection system? What are the opportunities with the debt? Can the debt be transferred? Legally, can that happen? Can it, and if it does, what does it look like? How would the billing look like for village users into the future? Would there be a bill for the collection and maintenance of the collection system and then a bill for the treatment? How would that look and what would those estimated costs be? I think the data is there, I just think it needs to be determined as to what's gonna be acceptable to the town board and what's gonna be acceptable to the trustees. I could comment on several of those things, based on looking at all of this information independently. And as everybody in this room knows, and if you don't know, I don't have a dog in this race. I'm not a town resident and I'm not a village resident. And so for me to look at it as best as I'm able objectively, the only other piece that I would like to bring up is the concern that I have as the committee chair in that the recommendation to move forward with sitting down with the town and saying, what would we actually do? Where would we go? Now, I know that there are some components that have already been discussed, but I think you gotta figure out the rest of them, and then you need to maybe go get some legal counsel to say, that's a great idea, but you can't do it. The law doesn't let you transfer debt, or you can't create a this or a that, or whatever would have to come that you guys negotiated as trustees and board members. And then moving forward from that, then I think you would have an opportunity to say, this is a good thing for the village users, the village residents, the village taxpayers, or maybe we're better off staying with ourselves. The only comment that I would like to make that came up after this report was written, and I would have included it had I had that information prior to writing the report and sending out to the committee members, is that it appears to me that time has become of the essence. It appears to me that the town is very rapidly approaching the point in time where they need to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to complete out a regional plant or whether they're going to continue with operations to handle what they need to handle as far as the town is concerned. I don't think it was their intent to always prepare at a regional basis because that would really overbuild capacity. If they had the flow from the village, they have the capability, the engineering studies are done, they have the ability to do that, it would move forward in that direction. But I do think that there's gonna come a point in time, and I believe that it's gonna happen more quickly than I originally anticipated, that the town's gonna have to make a decision. And if the town makes a decision that we don't know what the village wants to do, we need to move forward, I look at it in the picture of, you're building a house. There comes a point in time when it's time to put the roof on. And if we're gonna put the roof on, we're gonna do it, or we're not gonna do it. But we're gonna have to move forward, and so I'm afraid that the window may close on this opportunity for the village if a decision is not made or a negotiation isn't set in play. So I guess my thought for that is that I don't think it would be a wise thing for you to say, let's meet in January or February and see what we can work out. I think we should meet soon, relatively quickly with the town board and say, what would it look like? What's the picture gonna look like? And then, once you've got that, I think you'll have a much better understanding of what it's gonna look like for users. Now, I think the studies call it year one, and then what's it gonna look like 20 years from now?
Right, and I agree with you, what was presented to us, and I believe, both engineers, stood up here and said what was shown to the residents, shown to us, was best, or worst case scenario up there on the screen without all the information, without the grants in it. They went about it different ways, but they got to the same spot. So the other thing that you're talking about are things that Jake brings up. There's a lot of internal things that the village has to figure out that the town will have nothing to do with. Well, who's gonna cover snow plowing, who's gonna do those things? That's something that we need to talk about. Hey, if we went this way, how do we figure that out? So those are things we have to do. And then there's things around collections, how we bill, we have to discuss those, you know, with the town and say which way it is gonna go, and we have to come up with it, so, I agree with that.
I do think that there are some things that, once you've come up with an idea, I think that there may be some legal restrictions and there may be some structural differences between the town and.
Well, that's where I was gonna go to Don,
Yeah.
because I don't think we can all meet as two boards.
Can we, Don? I know we tried to do that before.
No, sure you can.
Okay,
It's gotta be a public meeting, it's gotta be,
yes.
an open meeting, but sure you can meet.
Done that. And I don't know if necessarily the committee was saying that both entire boards needed to meet, or whether they could just send representatives, a couple of trustees and a couple of town council people, and sit down and say, this is where we think, you know, I think each board has got a general idea of where they would like to go. But I do think that there are the two biggest pieces that I see, that I think the committee, you know, was stuck on a little bit, was the collection system and the debt. And I think there are some legal restrictions on the debt and the collection system. Quite frankly, from a personal standpoint, this wasn't wholly discussed as a committee, but the vision that the town does not have a town-wide district, they have districts. So I'm not sure that there would be a whole lot of difference if the town took over the collection system. Wouldn't it really just become a sewer district within the town, which would be responsible for its pipes and its maintenance and its costs?
In
So I'm not
fairness,
sure.
I believe the town has a townwide district and they take on capital, their districts, if there's an expansion of the system, they set up a district, I think, to pay for that capital improvement for if they run sewers where there is no sewers. But as far as collection and treatment, I think that's all a townwide.
And that's one of
townwide
those
district.
pieces that we couldn't answer
Yeah.
as a committee, to say, how would it look like, and what would it look like into the future? And what would you need to have staff-wise if the collection system becomes part of a town district? Could it be, there's lots of open questions, and I think that having a meeting between the town and the town and the village boards, the village trustees, I think that would be a good next step. The committee feels that that would be a good next step for you guys to do that, and sit down, and if you can come up with a model and say, these are the things that we now know for sure, this is what collection would look like, this is what debt would look like, this is what billing would look like into the future, then I think you could say, all right, this makes sense for the village, or this doesn't make sense for the village to move forward. My only point that I would, I just don't think that that process can go on for another 6 months. I'm not even sure that it can go on for another 3 months. The construction is underway. If you've not been down Phillips Road, they're well underway. That plant is being modified and it's underway, and there's gonna come a day and time when they're gonna say, are you on? And you're gonna have to say yay or nay, and if you say nay, then that window closes and they're gonna continue, they're gonna complete their plan. So, any other questions for me?
I guess
Yes,
in
Jake?
regard to that, there's currently doing construction on phase one, which is the secondary clarifiers. The primary, if I'm, and you're probably more familiar, the primary clarifiers and the digester are the only components but that would be in phase two, they'd still have to go out to bid and still have to decide. And the only difference is the going from a 42-foot to a 50-foot digester. The other things are components that could be added on. It's from 3 to 4, right? There's primaries.
My question, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but you mentioned that it came to your attention that there's more urgency, time is of the essence. Was that something that came from the town itself, or was that were there other sources for that?
It came from the town and from the town's engineers.
Okay, because as Jake was mentioning, when the town's engineers had presented the way that they had constructed their project, set up their project, they tried to build in as much flexibility as they could, knowing that this question about whether the village would join, wouldn't join, was on the table. So I believe phase one is under construction, that it can proceed and will proceed without the village being part of that. The question is, for the next pieces, how critical are those components to the town's own operations? Because there are certain things that will need to be done, for example, taking out the clarifier that's currently dedicated to the village and then replacing that with a chlorine contact tank to get additional chlorine contact time. Whether that's necessary just for the town's own purposes, or whether it's necessary as part of the regional alternative and not necessarily just for the town. So I don't know
And
I
I
don't
think
know,
that,
I don't wanna speak for,
right, and
Their
I'm sure,
engineering.
I'm not talking any engineering talk, that's not gonna come out of my mouth, but I am sure that people would be able to explain where their concerns are.
okay,
And the time frame for that. The impression that I got, in the discussions that I had after our last meeting, following up on some earlier requests from the committee, to get some information from the town, was that we're coming up on that point. And, you know, your first study is 2 years old now. We've been looking at this for a little while. And I don't know the exact timing, and I don't know the exact steps of when exactly that drop dead date would be. But I think that when you guys meet for the first time with the town board, it's not gonna be something that's gonna be resolved in 15 minutes. I think there's gonna have to be discussions, and what would this look like, and come back and ask Jake questions, and then they're gonna have to go back and ask their engineers questions, you're gonna have to ask your engineers questions, and I think that that process is gonna take some time.
Seems
The
like you
sooner
didn't
it
have some of
starts.
the answers that were answered, there was some meetings, so around collections, debt, and stuff like that, employees, those were answered by the town. And Judy was a part of those meetings, so I'm not sure why she didn't share that information, but those questions were answered.
the one thing that I can think maybe why the town is anxious about it is every phase of the project they're gonna go through, they need to apply for funding just like the village does. So there are certain windows that they have to abide by to apply for that, assistance, just like the village would.
I
So
didn't
that
get
might be the
I-
reason, I'm not sure.
I didn't get specifics as to what it was, and I'm sure that if the trustees reached out to the town board, that they would probably get an idea of what time frame they're wanting to work in. I mean, it is their project, and, you know, they can move
Were
forward.
they present at your committee meetings?
No,
Why not?
at one point, I believe, Jake reached out to the plant operator at the town, he was not initially invited. The committee asked to have him come for input, and his response to that is that he had not been directed by the town board, nor had the town board been asked for representation. In fact, the town board felt that the trustees had made it, in the discussion of the trustees meeting, had made a very strong suggestion that the town not be included in that process. So, that was part of a discussion that took place at one of the trustees meetings, and I happened to go back and look at that tape, and that was in fact, what happened was the comment was made, we don't want the town there, we want the village to look at this and see where it can go. So that's why the town did not participate. When he was approached, he said he would not attend, and then he said he would attend it, but he wouldn't be able to answer any questions because he wasn't officially asked to be the representative of the town. The town board had not said to him, go represent us as a town board to that committee, and because that was never solicited by the trustees. Anything else for me?
I think I'm set, thoroughly
Thanks for your time.
No problem. I
Well
appreciate
done.
that.
Well done, Barry.
Opportunity
Well
to
done.
have this one.
Just, I have one final thing, just to clarify your summary and the committees, and thank you for all the time that you and everyone else spent on that.
Terrific job.
The recommendation that summarizes, get together, see what, hash out what the final things would look like, and then decide, not decide that you're gonna do it, and then work out the details afterwards. It's figure out the details and then see if it's a good idea.
Well, I think that's the consensus of the committee, is that you really don't have enough information to say proceed or don't proceed until you know what the model looks like. I mean, it kinda makes sense. You're not gonna walk into that, but.
Absolutely.
It's not true, Jake.
I can show you the tape.
The village wouldn't be committed to anything until
contract is signed,
until
that's
a
what I said.
memorandum of understanding was signed.
So we
And
can
that
look at the
happens
tape.
at the tail end of this joint committee.
Right, but the discussion was, we should let them know whether we're doing it or not, and then work out the details. That's exactly what was said.
We compared it to like a union contract or a merger, so if we look at the basic things, cause there's so many unknowns, and we say, yeah, we're leaning towards going that way, then we still need to have a contract and an agreement, so let's say, hey, we're willing to jump on board and do a joint, but we gotta work through all these things, and if we don't get some wins, we're not signing nothing, and we're back to the drawing board.
I misunderstood that.
That's what I
I
meant.
misunderstood, because that's the exact question I asked, is so at the end, if we decide it's not a good idea, then we don't do it? No, we don't do it, but.
Well, yeah, we don't sign it
No,
until
so
we
we
get
still
what we
do
want.
it, we still do it, but.
No, we can, if we don't get any wins for the village, I think we can stop it at some point, so I'm sorry, it wasn't like,
No,
that's how I didn't explain it, but yeah, I think there's gotta be wins, it's not just one way, I agree with you. It's gotta be wins for both, but if we're deciding to move forward with it in principle, we still have to sign a contract at the end, and you look across the room at the town board and say, listen, nothing we asked for or wanted is in favor of this village, I'm not signing this. That's how I kinda listen.
And you have another component there too, is you currently have an IMA, right? Is that what they call it, IMAs, in your municipal
Yes.
agreements? You currently have an IMA that obligates the village to certain things with that town plant. There would probably be a new IMA at some point in time, so that would be a part of that negotiation as well. What's that gonna look like? What are those requirements gonna be? So. Anything else for me? You got a handful of work on this one. But I really do think that the committee was wise in their assumption that you really need to come up with an idea, and I don't think you can do that without town participation. I think you need to have the town people, the town board, and their input to say, this would work for us, this would not work for us. And then, as you said, Jerry, okay, if it doesn't work for the village, it doesn't work for the village, then, let's not move any further forward. All right, anything else for me? Thank you, thanks for letting me come in, thank you for moving me up on the agenda, I appreciate that. Good night, yep. Thank you.
I'm not going to original discussion. Well, any comments? Anything for?
There's a lot of unanswered questions.
If it's a public meeting, let's sit down and finish
We
things
need
up.
to do that, absolutely.
Well, do you wanna, since you're the mayor, sir, do you wanna reach out to the town supervisor and have this discussion, or do you want me to reach out to
A
them?
discussion?
Well,
Discussion,
well-
I'll ask whether or not
Right, well,
our
'cause
boards can,
well, we just have to share some of this information, so again, it's gotta be cooperation obviously from the town, but they're at the point, well, you know, you have all the data, we have all the data, so let's make the decision, so we're saying, we don't have all the data or all the questions answered, so they're gonna need, first of all, they're gonna need to willingly have to sit down with us, if they're not, then we're sitting here like this, so.
I think that there needs to be more detail.
Right, but before Heather just sends a calendar invite, I think it would be appropriate for you, for me, or somebody to call them to say, what are your thoughts? I mean, I think that's a better partnership than them just receiving an email and a calendar. So they can understand what we're trying to get at. Cause, if this board's not willing to give them answers with all these questions, then, and we need the questions answered by a joint partnership or meetings, then we need to. So I'll take that on if you'd like me to, but I'm just asking if you'd rather do it.
I think we can discuss and sit down, maybe in terms of what it would look like, the conversation would look like. You've had more direct contact with Ron.
Well, I know I took initial questions from this group, which Barry said that they didn't have answers to, collections, debt and all that, which is not, that's not a true statement, because they did answer those. And Judy was one that was with me in that meeting at the time, so we did get some of those answers. There's a bunch of other questions that Jake has that we didn't get answers from, so I agree there's still more information to get. But some of those questions that Barry answered, we did get answers on.
In fairness, she did say that that was her understanding, is that the town said they would not take the debt, they didn't want the collection system and the personnel, they would find room for it
Okay,
at the town.
okay.
So that was shared,
Okay.
wasn't,
Elaborate.
100%, elaborated, or wasn't 100% certain that, hey, we didn't get a absolute no in writing that, no, we will not take your.
Correct, it's all
collection
conversation.
system, yeah.
Okay.
Those are things that need to be.
Yeah, that's really.
Yeah, those, in how the debt's structured, if you look at the last thing that B and L came up with, and I'm working for the village residents, right? And I'm gonna be a pain in the butt, and I know it, and I look at way too much detail and overthink stuff, but it's on behalf of somebody else. But I think it's important to have, we have to be able to have you guys make a good decision, have those questions answered, and how is it gonna be set up? How can it be set up? Are we taking two entities and making one, or are we taking, with us still having a collection system, that almost creates three entities. Just simple things, for example, the town's collection system budget in B&L's last report, their collection system budget's about $536,000. But all their employee benefits are still in their O&M and treatment budget. So you'd have to make sure, because those are different subset of users, I don't think that the village residents would pay for health insurance for someone that only works in the collection system. And I don't think the town would intend this for us, but that's gotta be discussed and see how the system would be formed if there was a regional treatment. If that's better for our village customers, I'm all for it. But we don't know if it's better or not, because we don't know what we don't know even, you know? How would that be set up? Well, how does it have to be set up legally? You know, in the laws, I don't think you can intermingle funds between different subsets of users in different districts. Maybe you can, maybe I'm all wet, but I think we have to ask the questions, you know, and determine things like that, because that's a huge chunk of change. Their benefits are about $561,000. And if 60% of their workforce works in the collection system, 60% of 560,000 is a pretty good chunk of change that ought to get moved to collection system out of O&M, you know, for those benefits. And that changes the numbers a bit. And that's why I still contend that the year one numbers aren't year one. It might be year one in theory, but in practice, how is it gonna affect what would the true cost to our village users be? And I think that's the important thing to get to, is what would the true cost to our village users be actual? You know, and here's the thing, you know, so. But I appreciate it.
I think that highlights why a meeting with the town is needed.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
they can only answer that question. Because
Yeah.
if in fact, you're right, if in fact they've got all the benefits tied into the sewage treatment plant and not the collection system, that's not fair.
Right.
You're gonna have to somehow back that out again.
And they're just like us,
You can change it.
those people work back and forth between the collection system, between the plant, so you'd have to allocate or come up with hey, 80% of their time's in the collection system, 20's in the plant. You don't have to sit there and mark down every 15 minutes, well, he went over here and then he left, and, you know, because that would cost more than, you know, to track it than it would, but somehow it's gotta be discussed and thought about, I guess, you know?
They don't
Well, I
work
guess it
strictly.
depends. You could, what if, you know, the town doesn't wanna physically own the collection system? They don't wanna own the pipes and stuff. So what if the village contracted out maintenance of the collection system to the town? So now the town employees are in charge of both collection systems, except for capital costs, and then your problem isn't really a problem.
No, then you've got kind of a town-wide
Right,
system,
right.
except for,
You know,
because
then the-
capital are all capital, and it would just be the location where it's at, yeah.
Right. So that might be a way to solve that issue. But again, you don't know, you know, until you talk to them and see if they're willing to do that.
Yeah. And half of it is, like I said, we don't know what we don't know yet.
Right.
So,
But then there are certain internal things that I don't know if you've gotten this board, that, you know, what's, like the snow plowing, the things that the three people at the plant do, and if they're not around, you gotta hire somebody, or, you know, what's the cost of that? That's gonna affect the general fund.
yeah,
So you gotta look at both the overall cost to village residents, including what the rate, sewer rate's gonna be, the rent's gonna be, and what impact there might be on the general fund. So you need to, I would think, if you developed
I gave her brain
Oh,
health to Marcia, and she's still here, so. So it wasn't as bad as I thought, but yeah, I can do, yeah.
a list of those kind of things.
Yeah,
And
expand
what are,
on that.
and what are the costs, what are the potential costs, depending on